Jehan Marcoux. Dr. Jehan Marcoux is our first presenter. You guys may not know this, but Jehan actually was one of our founding members of the San Francisco ASA chapter in 2003, and has been a ASA volunteer and advocate through his education process. And for our staff, when things sound too sciencey, which is my favorite word, and I need help breaking it down so that I can pronounce everything in the sentence and explain a research paper that just came out to the masses. We call Jehan, and he's just an invaluable resource to our organization. So, Jehan, thanks for dumbing down science for me. Come on up. Jehan Marcoux, everyone.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for being here so early on Sunday. So today, the title of my talk today is on the AHP Cannabis Monograph. I am on social media, and I'm also trying to just started this sort of cannabis science and history discussion group on Facebook. So if you're into discussing research articles, anthropology, ethnobotany, look for the group. So this is the monograph cover. You may have seen it. Like I said yesterday, I really love the cover. I think it's a great summary of where we are with medical cannabis, with the 10-foot tall barbed wire fence and the guard tower. But this book provides standards for, basically, as it says, quality, purity, and potency of the plant. And I think this is really important. So being able to identify the plant, not just when you see marijuana growing, but how do you identify it in a product? How can we develop tests to get a finished, say, food product and know if it's made with leaf, flower, stem, root, and other products? This also helps provide standards for testing. So it has methods in there. It has some forward-thinking things. One of the things I really like about it is the information on cell culture, on how to sort of grow cannabis plants in little petri dishes. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the monograph is and why it exists. So basically, dumb it down a little bit. How does a plant become a medicine? And there's a sort of simple kind of formula: is you write a monograph, then the herbal products industry writes standards, then you apply them together in some sort of certification or group. And so this is kind of what we have now: is we have sort of nationally approved guidelines for the operators, for the laboratories, cultivation is coming soon. And then we have this monograph, which is how to till the soil, how to grow the plant, how to test it. And this is some information that was talked about yesterday about herbal supplement acts and how they're used. So just in a nutshell, the Accidentally Supplement Health and Education Act is basically that act that allows plant products to be sold at Whole Foods as herbal supplements. They just have to have a little warning on them about, this has not been approved by the FDA because the FDA does not research plant-based medicines. Oh, sorry, that last part's not in there, but the FDA isn't really necessarily in the business of making plant-based medicines, but they are in the business of regulating them, which is a really kind of odd thing to be. So we have to have monographs in a separate way to establish them as medicines in the guidelines. And so with the monograph and the APA guidelines, we can sort of start bringing standards. We have some fluid documents, the APA guidelines, which are, they're meant to change and adapt to things in the industry. And these are meant to kind of figure out, well, who's doing things right? This is not a strange thing for industry, for any herbal product, whether it's ginkgo biloba or sassafras root or whatever. People have standards, you have to deal with it. It's analyzed. If you want to see an example of what a natural products lab does, I'd recommend looking at Alchemist Labs in Costa Mesa, California. They screen plants using very simple techniques like thin layer chromatography, looking at contamination potency, and they use plant monographs in their study of cannabis. And so I'm not just here to plug the monograph book and to plug PFC, but I wanted to show you maybe some fun pictures from the monograph, my favorite sections, and in hopes that it'll interest you in picking it up and reading it. It's only about, I think, about 70, 80 pages long, and one of the first things it talks about is anatomy of the cannabis plant. So we have some very, on the left, we have some very kind of historic uses, parts of the plant, different parts of the seeds, the calyx, and different types of morphology of leaves. There's a section about, sativa, indica, phenotype, what those plants look like, but it's not necessarily helpful for looking at chemical profiles. But it does walk you through the anatomy of the plant. There are much more detailed pictures about the anatomy. Like for instance, one thing I learned while writing this is they're not called buds, they're called inflorescence. So that's a take home. Yeah, so those are some really nice inflorescence on the plant. But so it does talk about THC and CBD plants and have differences between them and discuss sort of the nature of these plants. This is one of my favorite parts of the slide. It talks about morphology of cannabis buds and inflorescence and how they differ, what makes them that way, and sort of how you can tell what their growth characteristics were from the finished product. And the ones on the bottom left, I think, are the really important ones. On the bottom left, you see two buds. One looks kind of smaller, maybe crispier, to use a non-scientific term. And I would just like to do a little interactive session. If you could guess what the difference between the buds on the left are and the buds on the right are, what would you say? Who could go? So drying. So if you say curing and drying, how old? This is true. They are from the same plant, but how old are the inflorescence on the left? How old did you say those are?
3 weeks.
Those are a year old. So another thing that this monograph provides are storage conditions. So when you process something, how do you store it for maximum longevity, for maximum consistency? They're not necessarily worried about making the most potent inflorescence you've ever seen in your life, but making a consistent, reliable product that can, have a long shelf life. This is another one of my favorite parts of the monograph, and that's the discussion of trichomes. And I've had some really great trichome discussions in the last 48 hours. Scientifically. And so the important thing is one of my favorite things is High Times magazine. They always put these pictures of like immature plants, immature fluorescence, and some of the pictures of trichomes that they show make me laugh because sometimes it's those bottom ones, the non-glandular wispy ones. And there's not really much information you can get from trichomes that aren't producing cannabinoids, except that they're not producing cannabinoids. But there are different parts of the plant produce different things. So depending, when I talked earlier about identifying a product, whether it's made from stalk, leaf, or inflorescence, that is actually important because the quality of the medicinal product, the quality of the cannabinoids will change. I believe that the sort of shorter, stockier ones that don't have the stalk with the cap, those ones are mostly like in leaf. And so if you're taking like outer leaves and making a product, that's going to be different than if you're taking something that has the typical stalk and cap trichomes. So this is a really kind of fun thing to learn about it. And if you don't really understand what trichomes are, they're these nice little waxy tubes that are like factories. And so the oil gets sort of manufactured and then it comes out the top. And there's enzymes in there that synthesize things each step of the way. And it's mutations in those synthases that give us different varieties. There's different enzymes. The enzyme that synthesizes THC from its precursor, if that's knocked out or it's mutated, you're not going to have a big, strong THC producing plant. So one of my favorite things is a trichomes discussion in the monograph. I think this is, the cell culture of plants, I think, is really exciting. I'm not fundamentally opposed to genetic modification, something we've been doing since the beginning of time. If you've seen the recent episodes of Cosmos, they have a discussion about dogs. That's a form of genetic modification. But I think the idea of being able to, if you have a strain and you want to preserve it for long periods of time without flowering it, how do you do it? This is one of the techniques at the University of Mississippi is to basically culture plants in a specific medium before transplanting them out into the field is one of the ways you can do it. And so I think there's a lot of promise in this. I don't think they're really to the point where they can grind up the plants to their stem cells and mix them together and grow a fully functioning plant, but I think that's the direction it's going. So they have a little bit forward thinking about how do you cultivate these plants in a petri dish. I think is a really, no one else is having that discussion really right now. And this isn't meant to put people out of business. It isn't meant to tell you what products you can and can't sell. This document was made with the help of people from all forms, all types of the industry. So we have, people from pharmaceutical companies. We have Dr. Marco Del Soli from University of Mississippi collaborating on it. Michelle Sexton was on there. But we also had people like Vincenzo DiMarzo, who's one of the world's most published pharmacologists in the world. And we also had people who actually are in the medical marijuana industry, like Valerie Corral and Mike Corral. They have a process for processing their cannabis in fluorescence. And it's not just used to make a little bit, it's used to make a lot of standardized, reliable, consistent product. And so their method for processing cannabis is in this book. So the point is that these are not methods that are super high obstacles to achieve. These are methods that people are actually using in the field today, and it's people who are in collectives are able to do this. So I think these are really good guidelines. It's a bar. It's a bar that people can pass. So it's not something to be intimidated about. It's something you can strive for. It also has some information about methods. So if you're interested in what an internal standard is, how do you use, what's the method you can use in your GC? Say you have a method that you've been working on. So you think you have a run that can analyze THC in 5 minutes. Maybe you could compare it to, you will compare it to this method to validate it. And you should get the same number or a very, very close number. Or if you develop a machine, like say a black box thing, and you sprinkle weed on it and it spits out a number, maybe you can compare that to a test that's been used for 30 years by labs all around the world. Just maybe validate it and get rid of the black box approach. So I think that this will bring a lot of consistency, standards, and kind of demystify the testing process for a lot of people. Because if they can do the methods in the monograph and get the same results as whatever method they're using, then you know that it's validated and it works. So just to kind of sum it up a little bit, some of the things that this also has, like I said, it talks about potency, analytical testing, storage, this list of pesticides, contamination, and also discusses microbial and fungal analysis and limits. I love this slide. This is not in the monograph, but I saw this at a presentation at NYU, and the researcher gave me the slide. And this is from GW Pharmaceuticals Grow House, and I thought it was a good idea of how to implement quality control. All the little tiny boxes are HPLC machines, and you can see that between every process it's tested. So you start off with your THC dominant variety, your CBD dominant variety. It's cured, it's QC'd at that point. And then before it goes into liquid CO2, it's QC'd. After it comes out of liquid CO2, it's QC'd. Then after the peppermint flavoring is added to make it palatable, it's QC'd again. And then before it gets actually shipped out, it's tested again. So you have a lot of tests. And so, this is pharmaceutical grade level, but this is something that, could be used. Something to think about, food for thought, about how these techniques can be applied and used to create a really standardized product. So it also has lists of solvents and their dangers, solvents not to use for extracting cannabis. There's a big list in there and sort of a little rationale for each one. But just to summarize, the AHP, the monograph, people made the monograph, they exist. Their existence is for advising governments about how to deal with plants. That's what they've been doing since 1942 when cannabis and 100 other plants were removed from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. They've been helping to reintroduce them to their foundation. And so APA has developed guidelines for the cannabis industry. And so you put these together, you get a certification process, so you bring consistency and standardization to the business. So thank you very much for your time. These are some resources, apa.org. if you want to find the guidelines, herbal.hp.net, Safe Access Now, you should all know that website. And I do some blogging for East Coast Resource Site at the Sensi and the Sensible Science blog at freedomisgreen.com. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take your questions after the panel as well.
Thank you, Jehan. So our next speaker is actually a phenomenal resource for our movement. I'm so excited that you all get to meet Dr. Korn. I feel like in this work, there's something that's been on all of our lists as advocates since I started ASA in 2002, and that is we need education for doctors. How many of you have been in a meeting where the answer was education for doctors, right, like in your strategic plan? Well, we are very fortunate because our next speaker, Dr. Stephen Korn, has developed continuing medical education for doctors on cannabis. I'm going to let him tell you about the program. But I also just want to say it is such an honor to work with Dr. Korn. I work with a lot of doctors, scientists, and other professionals. I will say my staff just loves working with you. It's such an honor. So everyone, welcome Dr. Korn.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure attending this meeting, working with Steph, with Talana, with Hunter, the whole entire staff. And just as a note before I get started, I don't go to, I mentioned this last night when they presented me with an incredible award for Medical Professional of the Year. I don't attend many medical meetings. I really like to learn from reading. When I'm not at meetings, I do have some free time. I like to be home with my wife, my wonderful 11-year-old son. But this, I thought, would be a special meeting, and it's turning out to be an absolutely incredible meeting. From the academic side, the research side, and also from interacting with all of you and the patients. I've called home countless times just sharing the story with my family, or stories with my family of what you've gone through. And I'm coming in at a very fortunate time to this, as you'll hear. I'm only involved with this most recently. But you guys have worked so hard to create the groundwork to fight the battles and to get where we are today. And now I just see things moving exponentially forward. So hopefully I can help with that and be part of that. So I'd like to just share a few things. One, how I came to be involved with this topic. I think it's an interesting story. My long-term role in providing free education and the resource that we built for healthcare providers and that we're going to continue with, and also a resource that we will be launching for patients, caregivers, and dispensary staff, so they'll also have access to this material. So just to start off, the title of the talk is Medical Marijuana Establishing an Educational Resource, but it should really be called the following. I don't know the answers to any of medical marijuana questions. So let me be honest and let me explain. So my wife and I are both physicians. We teach residents, we do clinical, we do a lot of a variety of different things. And we were discussing medical marijuana at home, and this was back in November of 2012. And we were discussing the proposed regulatory changes in Massachusetts, and our son overheard the discussion. And he came in, and it was perfectly appropriate what we were discussing, and he came in and he had some questions for us. And he said, Dad, he goes, what about carbon monoxide? He goes, that can't be good for you. And these are just actual questions. And he goes, doesn't smoke produce cancer-causing chemicals? And he asked, that was another question. And he said, what if you write a prescription, now we know Massachusetts is certification, and a patient then has a car accident, are you responsible? And he said, well, every day is like this with my son. It's great. And he said, what about secondhand smoke if there are children in the house? And I turned to him, I said, Bradley, these are incredible questions. I said, and I truly don't know the answers to these questions. I said, if I don't know the answers to these questions, and I'm considered a pain expert, think about all those doctors who are further removed from the pain literature who are also not going to know these answers. So what we decided to do is we realized that it could be two extremes of doctors, and this was a major concern. There can be doctors who may just say, they won't say it, but they will know nothing about it, and they'll just say, no, I'm not certifying you, I want nothing to do with this. The other concern I have is there may be doctors with intention who will say, yeah, I'll gladly certify you, but then have no way of guiding their patients because they're really not educated in this area. Neither extreme was going to be very good. So we decided that we should really launch an educational initiative in this area. Let me give a little background. So by way of background, in 1998, I co-founded the Answer Page. It's a free educational resource, and I created it just for our residents. I thought it'd be a good resource for our residents because the way things work in the hospital, especially in the operating room environment, is you have the greatest plans for doing education that day, but with emergencies, lunch breaks, changes in rooms, things like that. Before you know it, it's the end of the day and you don't do the teaching that you intended. So with a colleague, we decided, well, what if we created this educational website so that every day the residents and the staff would have something to discuss and something from which to learn. And we launched it, and it went incredibly well. But then what we found out was Hopkins was linking to us, Stanford, Harvard was linking to us, and it was great, and we're getting incredible thank yous. But what was, I think, most meaningful is we started getting thank yous from around the world. And two, I'm just going to note two that will always stick in my mind. One said, thank you, we use your website every day, which really resonated with me because the whole key was learn something every day. It says, we can't afford textbooks, but we use your site every day. Another was from an Indian anesthetist. He said, thank you, you are helping the developing countries educate themselves. And once I got these responses, I knew we had to keep this going. So we kept this going since 1998. Initially, it was just my colleague and I writing the content, like writing a term sheet every night. We never missed a day, but on Sundays, we'd be frantically trying to prepare the next week's work. Now it's a little different. Now it's accepted criteria for promotion in academia. We have a really nice large staff, which I'll explain very shortly about writing content. And so we've been advancing this effort. So we did a few things also to keep it really interesting. So I had this idea of creating an interactive crossword puzzle. So if you go to this site, and this is going to be optimized later on for iPads and things like that, but right now it works really well on a computer system. We created an interactive crossword to make it a fun way to learn. For so many nights I'll be on call and the nurses and doctors will be at the computers playing games and say, yeah, I really should be doing my reading, but I really like these games. So I said, what if you just couple the two and make the crossword the CME activity or the nursing activity? And also you'll notice, unlike other types of crossword puzzles, the questions, the clues are intentionally long. And we did this to reinforce the education, and also if people just jump to the crossword, we really want to get the education across. So that's why the clues are a little bit different. We've now provided well over 100,000 hours of continuing medical education credit. We're rated in about 120 countries, and now we have this international team of expert writers. So in addition to our areas of perioperative medicine, anesthesiology, hospital medicine, clinical statistics, we also do needed areas such as risk management, opioid prescribing, pain management, palliative care, and we also now meet all the requirements for the Department of Public Health's requirements for CME for medical marijuana. So we launched our medical marijuana educational content in January 2013, shortly after the law went into effect in Massachusetts. And then news releases, press releases, and really just positive feedback started pouring in. And then the Massachusetts Medical Society, I'm very pleased to note that Massachusetts Medical Society, the publishers of the New England Journal of Medicine, they're our joint sponsor for all our educational content. And this was exciting given the whole political climate of this topic. And in fact, they've co-branded our opioid abuse series that we wrote. And it's now one of the most popular online courses. And I just want to note that they don't edit, they don't tell us what to write, they're just our joint sponsors, and they've been incredibly supportive of what we were doing. In fact, what they've done is they've linked to all we are their sole source for education in this area. So they link to us directly for all our educational content. And I'm also pleased to note that they've been asking me to go to all the district society meetings to speak to the doctors and to speak to other healthcare providers about this initiative. So it's very exciting how supportive they've been. Also want to note that we've gotten philanthropic support. We've gotten the ongoing support of Mr. David Kessler of the Massachusetts Alternative Palliative Care. And the Mass ABC is an educational nonprofit focused on educating medical professionals, patients, and the general public on alternative pain and palliative care medicine. So right now, this is our educational content. And I'd like to take this opportunity to just briefly thank some of the people involved. It's definitely a collaborative effort. And so the first content we have provided, the Medical Marijuana Primary Week, was actually written by Paul Ramontano of Normal, and they've been incredible. They've been very supportive, everyone's been supplying unbiased, quality content. We're really proud of all the contributions. Our medical marijuana laws and agreements have been written in part by Evans and Cutler and Vicente Cedarberg. They've been also contributing. We have an excellent chapter on the development and evolution of the cannabis dispensary system by Amanda Ryman, who's here somewhere in the room. Thank you very much. Sunil Agarwal, who many of you probably also know, has been a great resource, has become a friend. He did the chapter on chronic pain and helped with some others. He also put us in contact with a PhD student, Thomas Lee, who did a great chapter on cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is very important for clinicians to know about, as people may present in the ER with this entity. And if you don't know about it, if you miss the diagnosis, it can be a real concern for the patient. I also want to thank Dr. Russo, who's here somewhere in the room. He's provided there he is. He provided me with, his two articles, and he's well referenced on several of our syllabus topics throughout our site. And I just want to mention our editor-in-chief is actually my wife, and she's been doing a great job with this. Her background is biomedical engineering. She's also an anesthesiologist and doctor. We trained in the same program. And we're just trying to create quality, unbiased education for all those involved. Just moving forward, we have an ongoing collaboration with Mark Ware and many of his colleagues to create ongoing education in this area. These are some of the topics that we'll be addressing, but the syllabus goes on and on. So I don't view this as just meeting a 2-hour CME requirement. This is an ongoing effort. And given the notice I just received, I'm not going to have time to discuss these, but we'll just quickly go through. Instead of reading through them, we address the basics of pharmacology. We discuss, what are cannabinoids, what's the endocannabinoid system, how do they interact with the human body. And you'll see this, it's used all registered for free on the site and the use of it. We go through physiology. And what I'm also pleased to note is that now in the anesthesia literature, studies like this are coming out. This just came out this last month, where in the premier journals, we are now looking at this, and we're looking at the endocannabinoid system and its relationship to pain and pain modulation. In fact, I'll just quickly read from the beginning of this one study. Not so quickly. Just, Okay, this study starts off by noting endocannabinoids regulate multiple physiologic functions by pharmacological actions in a manner similar to marijuana. Recently, much attention has been paid to the analgesic effect of endocannabinoids in terms of identifying new pharmacotherapies for refractory pain management. So I think it's just absolutely great that this is now in the literature that doctors are reading, and this is, this will be part of journal discussions, grand rounds, and so forth. We also discussed a lot about pain, the synergistic effect, what is pain perception, how does it modulate pain, and then we get into other indications such as gastrointestinal disorders, Crohn's, and then some interesting areas include its antibacterial effects. And as many of you probably know, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus is an incredible killer in the hospital setting, and we address the antimicrobial effects. And then there's even evidence to suggest that marijuana has anti-prion effects for with disorders such as mad cow disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob, Folds disease. So it's really remarkable. I'm almost there. I keep getting these notices. Okay, I'm almost there. So on that note, let me just conclude. So I can't go back. Actually, can we go back? So what I'd like to do is I'm going to leave you with, we have a crossword puzzle. And so it's not...
Now, if you haven't gone to the website, I encourage you all to. You can sign up. It's if you can get the education for free if you don't need the continuing medical education course. And actually, earlier this year, we actually did a project where we're sending out the questions every day. And when there's new content, we keep pushing it through our Facebook page. So that's it. But
also, because now we have so much content, we're actually redesigning the user interface. So within the next month or so, it'll be much easier to navigate. We're going to have to really enter through the syllabus. It was easy when there was just a few pieces of content, but now it's really grown dramatically, so that'll be coming short.
It's a good problem to have. There's so much CMEs that you have to redesign the website. So glad we could give you that job. Thank you, Dr. Farm. Our next speaker, Rick Doblin, has, you guys don't know Rick. Rick has been really pushing forward for research of medical cannabis in this country. You think it's hard to pass a state law? The uphill battle, I think it's just a straight wall that Rick has been pursuing. But in our work and our advocacy, one of the things that elected officials always ask us is, where's the research? What's happening with the research? And I know that this work has not been easy, Rick, and it's really phenomenal to say, actually, we are trying to get research, and we always talk about the work that Rick is doing and saying, like, this is what it looks like. So, Rick, we're just so honored that you haven't given up and that you keep pushing us forward. So thank you so much. Everyone, welcome Rick Doblin.
Well, my role in the movement so far has been to fail to obtain permission to do research. And I've taken a certain satisfaction in failing for a very long time, for working as hard as I can. And the reason that I've been able to sustain this for so long is because failure has been something that has been used as an argument for the need for state-level reform. That my approach has been to focus on the FDA, to focus on working through the federal system to develop the marijuana plant into a prescription medicine. And as long as there were people, as long as we were trying, the argument that why this should just go through the FDA, as long as we were encountering political obstructions rather than scientific obstructions, we were encountering political blockages, that helped fuel the movement for state-level reform. And it's also been clear that in some of the work that we've been doing with our current project that has finally succeeded. So it's been a 22-year effort, and on March 12th, the Public Health Service agreed to provide NIDA marijuana to a study of marijuana with veterans with chronic treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder. That was actually the result of a 22-year effort trying to get permission to do work through the FDA. So it started in 1992 with Dr. Donald Abrams, and I contacted, actually in 91 I realized that we needed to kind of go through the FDA, so I spent a year trying to find a doctor willing to do the struggle to get permission, and Donald came to me through Brownie Mary. I don't know how many of you remember. Brownie Mary was a wonderful woman who was providing marijuana for AIDS patients in San Francisco, and she would donate it for free, and she was at her dealer's house who would provide her with shake that she made into these brownies, and he got busted, and she got busted, and then it became a national situation where here this wonderful grandmother was doing this compassionate work for free, and she was facing jail time for doing that. And so I figured doctors at UC San Francisco might be willing to do research to support her. So finally, after a year of struggle, I ran into Donald Abrams, and he agreed to do this. And we obtained FDA approval, IRB approval. He was head of the San Francisco Consortium for AIDS Research. They approved it. And we were unable to get NIDA marijuana. They refused to provide it. And it was extremely tragic and frustrating that they wouldn't do that. But it shows very clearly that from the early 1970s, when marijuana was shown to be effective for nausea control for cancer chemotherapy, that the threat of marijuana research to the status quo was perceived as pretty great, that it would end up providing a different kind of information to people if scientific studies showed acceptable risk-benefit profiles. So research has been suppressed for over 40 years in this field. And we were unable then to move forward with Donald. So then I started working with Ethan Russo on a marijuana study for people with migraines. And similarly, this was in the late half of the 90s, we obtained FDA and IRB approval, and NIDA, once again, refused to provide the marijuana. And keep in mind, these are for privately funded studies that the FDA had already approved, as did institutional review boards. So it became clear at that time that there was two prerequisites that were necessary to make marijuana into a prescription medicine through the FDA. One was to break the NIDA monopoly on marijuana. And some of you have probably heard from Professor Craker about our 12-year effort to do that, and he was here yesterday. So one of the prerequisites was break the NIDA monopoly. The other was to get the FDA to accept vaporizers in human clinical research, because vaporizers have less carbon monoxide, to answer your son's question. And vaporizers don't burn the marijuana, so you don't get the products of combustion. And so I do believe that a rational risk-benefit analysis would approve marijuana in burned plant form, because we know that marijuana does not cause lung cancer. The cannabinoids have anti-tumor properties. But for all the political issues that we have against smoking, right now it's much more likely that the FDA would approve vaporized plant marijuana than they would smoked, although I think we should continue to try to work to make smoked marijuana approved as well. So with Dale Geringer and California Normal, we embarked on this long process to try to do research with vaporizers, and we figured out some sneaky ways that didn't get anybody in trouble to do our first study. Some NIDA marijuana given to patients, taken to a lab that had a DEA license, and then shipped to another lab that had a DEA license. And then we also did a marijuana potency study from vaporizers. So we ended up, once we did our initial study, we wanted, and this was with the Volcano vaporizer, we wanted to do additional studies. And so we spent 7 years trying to buy 10 grams from NIDA. 7 years, and it was so frustrating, not even for human use, just for laboratory use. And at the end of that, the lab that we were working with said it was bad for their business and bad for their reputation. They decided to drop out of the project after 7 years. So those studies have not been really further done by us. And then with the Professor Craker and the effort to break the monopoly, we started in 2001, submitted an application to FDA, and April of last year we finally lost in the appeals court after we won the administrative law judge lawsuit. And the basic rationale is that NIDA and its monopoly are adequately competitive, presumably because they sell at cost, and also that they have an adequate supply. So neither of these things are actually the case, but once we lost, it was clear to me that I needed to try yet again to do work with a clinical study. And so over 3.5 years ago, the FDA approved our marijuana PTSD study. And we submitted it to the Public Health Service the very next day after they approved it. And there are no time limits for when the Public Health Service reviews protocols. They spent over 4.5 months and they rejected the protocol for reasons that are structural. First off, the guidelines for access to privately funded research to NIDA's marijuana are that if you want to make the marijuana plant into a prescription medicine, this marijuana is explicitly not for you. It's written into the guidelines. that smoked marijuana is not appropriate as a medicine. Not that the FDA has decided that, but this is just the guidelines made in 1999 by HHS. And there was another mismatch is that the reviewers are used to reviewing grant applications from people seeking government money to do basic science research. And when you work with the FDA, you have to prove safety and efficacy in order to make a drug into a medicine, but you don't have to have the vaguest idea how the marijuana works, how the drug works at all. You don't have to have mechanism of action information. It doesn't really matter. People are suffering now. If something will help them with an acceptable safety ratio, then it should be made into a medicine. So what happened is that these reviewers coming from a basic science perspective who don't understand drug development were given the responsibility of evaluating a study after the FDA had already approved it, and then they completely rejected it. And they had all these reasons that they were against it, but that they were part of this sort of basic science approach. So then we went to the University of Arizona Institutional Review Board, and we gave them all of the reasons why the Public Health Service rejected the protocol. And we gave them our responses. And the University of Arizona IRB approved our protocol as we designed it, with rejecting all the Public Health Service criteria, all their critiques. And so then we resubmitted that protocol back to the Public Health Service with a few things. They said that they thought that the study was underpowered. Now again, you don't need to have definitive answers when you're doing research in phase 2, early phase 2. You just are doing exploratory studies. But we increased the study from 50 people to 70 people, and we added some safety measures. And then because of all the state medical marijuana laws, the marijuana legalization, the pressure was getting so clear that if they were continuing to block research, that it would have just been so awkward, and the media is really focusing on this more. So on March 12th, they approved it. And it's, so now the question is, why bother? Okay, so it's $1 million study. Why should we spend $1 million on going through the FDA? You know, to legalize marijuana in Massachusetts in 2016 will probably cost less than $2 million. So why should we spend around $1 million on trying to take a drug through the FDA? And there are a couple of good reasons that I have come up with why it's not totally fruitless. The first is that from a patient point of view, if you have a drug approved by the FDA, insurance companies will pay for it. And right now, medical marijuana patients have to buy all the medicine themselves. The other is that going through the FDA process is an educational tool. It educates doctors, it educates the public, it legitimizes a lot of things we've been saying about medical marijuana. Now, only in this narrow area for PTSD, but it's helpful in that regard. It also, I think, will help with the overall efforts towards educating the public about marijuana legalization. And I think the reason is because there is so much misinformation and fear-based propaganda that people are really scared of marijuana, unnecessarily so. So even though we have over 50% for legalization and way more than that for medical, you know, once there's attack ads, once things are questioned, support can diminish. So I think medical marijuana research can reinforce all of this. And then there's another reason, which is to keep a check on the for-profit companies like GW Pharmaceuticals and others in terms of their pricing. So that if you have the marijuana plant available, and the work that we're doing in Israel with the Ministry of Health and the producers there shows that they can produce high-potency trim buds for 50 cents a gram, 14 cents an ounce. So, you know, you talk about $14 an ounce. Yeah, so you talk about adding taxes, things like that, but it still is significant cost reduction compared to patented alternatives. And then the other part is that I estimate it'll cost around $8 to $10 million to make marijuana into an FDA-approved medicine, and this would include having a domestic supply. Right now, we still need to use native marijuana, and so in our phase 2 study, which is the one we just got approved, we will use native marijuana. They claim to have marijuana with CBD in it. We're going to find that out for sure, if they really do. But in about 2 years, I guess, we're going to be able to import high-potency marijuana, medical grade, from either Israel or Canada, possibly Uruguay, the Czech Republic. Some of these countries will produce marijuana from companies that will open up a drug master file at the FDA. Right now, nobody has. We're stuck with NIDA marijuana. Bedrocan in the Netherlands has not yet opened up a drug master file at FDA. GW won't sell us their marijuana, and so we're stuck with NIDA. But I think it makes sense to do a phase 2 study with NIDA marijuana, just get the thing started, and then we shift to phase 3. The other thing I'd like to say, and end with this, is that on Friday, Attorney General Holder said that he would be open to, the Obama administration would be open to Congress rescheduling if Congress was willing to do that. And one of the justifications he used was to facilitate medical marijuana research. And what I found so frustrating and ironic about that is that there are 2 key ways that medical marijuana research is obstructed. One is this Public Health Service review that ends up taking extremely lengthy periods of time. It took them more than 4.5 months the second time that they approved it. And the other is the NIDA monopoly. Both of those things the Obama administration could change without Congress. So they're saying, Congress, you do this for us, but they don't need that. The holder could order the DEA to give a license to Professor Craker and decide that NIDA did not have an adequate supply, which they don't. And he could also order HHS Secretary Sebelius to end the Public Health Service review, which would mean that we'd still have to get FDA approval, IRB approval, DEA approval, and all the state level approvals. So Congressman Blumenauer has graciously created with us a sign-on letter that would be something we would use to gather members of Congress in order to petition Secretary Sebelius to end the Public Health Service review. And unfortunately, the Democrats are not willing to go forward without bipartisan support. So I'm bringing in 3 veterans coming in later today, and we're going to be, during ACE's Lobby Day, we're going to be trying to find a Republican who's willing to be a co-lead on the sign-on letter. So if any of you have any suggestions, please come up to me afterwards as to which Republicans might be willing to do this. And I think that if we can really open the door to the scientific study of medical marijuana, that we're going to see research flourish. And at the same time, I really want to say that I value what GW Pharmaceuticals has done. I think that patients deserve options, and they should have Sativex, Epidiolex, they should have Marinol, they should have all this full range of options, but they should also include a generic marijuana plant-based medicine through the FDA standardized product.
Thank you, Rick. I think Rick always takes notes when we talk. Remember, you can continue. And also, does someone here have $1 million check for Rick? He's totally fine. You can give it to him outside afterwards. So you don't even have to give him $1 million right now. You can give it to him over 3 years. He'll be very, very excited. Thank you, Rick, for all of your work. So our last speaker on this panel is the executive director of the Center of the Study of Cannabis Social Policy. I just call it the center, sorry. Nice.